What's going on, everyone? Taylor Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of CLNS Media, but more from them later. Right now, we got another mailbag episode. I'm coming at you solo, some one-on-one time, me and you. We're going to have some fun today. You guys asked some fantastic questions, as always. Got some stuff booted up. One thing I'm really excited to talk about, we're going to get to at the end, my dream offseason scenario. I wrote down all the things I want from the roster, re-signings, free agent signings, draft picks, all that good stuff. A lot of really interesting topics to cover. But before we get into that, we're going to have to touch on a couple of players who've already re-signed with the Patriots. The first of those today was exclusive rights free agent cornerback Alex Austin, who the Patriots acquired late last season. Now, with exclusive rights free agents like the couple of guys that we're about to talk about, it's a pretty much a no-brainer. You know, as long as they're a fit with the team, you tend to usually see those guys get picked up. We saw it with Miles Bryant recently. We saw it with Nathan Rourke, actually. He was the first player to re-sign with the Patriots. So Alex Austin makes a lot of sense. He came on pretty well for the Patriots when he did get some playing time late last season. Obviously, they had so many injuries and different situations that went on at the cornerback position. So Alex Austin slid in there, played some good ball. You know, really the biggest thing you could really say against him was that he played some pretty soft coverage at times, and that allowed for some easy completions and sometimes first downs. But overall, I mean, I think everybody remembers the play against the Buffalo Bills where he baits Josh Allen into making a deep throw that Alex Austin ends up picking off. You also saw some swagger, which you'd love to see from the cornerback position, because a lot of the guys the Patriots have at that spot are pretty low-key guys. You got Christian Gonzalez, Jonathan Jones, Marcus Jones. Like, those are the guys you expect to contribute next season. And then if you want to throw Miles Bryant into that mix, if they re-sign him, you know, they're not really rah-rah, kind of pound your chest kind of guys like you had with, say, a Jack Jones or even J.C. Jackson. We still don't know what's going to happen with him. But those are more two guys who they bring a fire and an energy to the defense when they're at the top of their games. Alex Austin kind of brought that a little bit. And most importantly, you know, the swagger and all the energy, that's great. But the most important thing was his ability to be sticky in coverage. He was really competitive. And then you saw him, I think it was the last game against the Jets, where he had a couple nice reps against Garrett Wilson. Obviously, the weather wasn't great, but both players have to play in it. So I was really impressed by him, considering this was a seventh-round pick. This isn't somebody that anybody was expecting a lot of when he joined the Patriots, had previously been with the Buffalo Bills and the Houston Texans. So that's a pretty exciting one. I'm excited to see what he can do under Mike Pellegrino's tutelage with another season in New England. Another guy we got to touch on is offensive tackle Tyrone Wheatley Jr. Now, he didn't play a single snap last season after the Patriots traded Pierre Strong to the Cleveland Browns to acquire him. Another one that was kind of a no-brainer. Now, while he didn't get to play last season, Tyrone Wheatley is a pretty skilled player. You know, maybe not somebody who's going to compete for a starting job, but maybe in a backup role, he'd be pretty interesting. He reunites with Alex Van Pelt and Scott Peters, two guys who obviously had experience coaching him in Cleveland, where he spent 2022 and the 2023 offseason. So Alex Austin, Tyrone Wheatley Jr., two guys who are back in the fold for the Patriots. That makes it three players that the Patriots have officially re-signed and will be on the boat next year. And, of course, you also had Kyle Duggar, who they placed the transition tag on, but still going to see what happens with his status. Now, moving on to the mailbag questions. Let's get after it. Can you lay out the important dates of the offseason, a.k.a. free agency, draft, signing players, etc.? Absolutely. I'm actually going to pull up a screen right now. Hello, Commander Ray. I'm doing well. How are you? All right, let's get this one up. So we're going to go ahead and get ourselves into March. So free agency begins March 11th. That's when the legal tampering period begins. You can't sign players, but this is when you're actually allowed to start talking to them and trying to get deals done. That's why when Monday strikes, you're going to see all the Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport tweets just firing off saying, you know, they've agreed to contract terms. But the important thing to remember is these are not official until the contracts are actually signed, because we've seen over the past couple seasons, sometimes at the 11th hour, you'll see some players pull out for one reason or another. Maybe there's contract language they don't like. Maybe there's just another team that offers more and they make a last-second switch. So they can start negotiating with teams next week. Going to be very busy. Make sure you're locked on Pat's Daily and Patriots Press Pass. You can get all the good news and updates that we're going to be providing you. But yeah, so March 11th is when we're actually going to see a lot of that stuff start really ramping up. And then let's see what else we got here. Negotiating period, respective unrestricted free agents permitted to exclusive contract. The league year actually begins on the 13th. So when the 13th hits, that's when you get to see transactions and things like that actually be made. So that's when you can see players start getting traded. That's when you're going to see these free agent contracts, at least the initial wave, actually happen. And sometimes what you'll see is once those players get signed, there's obviously, as Patriots fans, people are going to be very familiar with this. You see a different wave where it's more of the like second or third tier players. Once the market is kind of set and people have a better idea of what certain players are getting paid, then you see other guys start signing deals. And those are more of the middle roster or bottom of the roster kind of signings. So let's see. We got the first day league year, trading period. Also, of course, that's when players can start getting traded. So teams can start initiating into talks. And then, if the Patriots want to add depth by getting some veteran players or something like that, that's when that kind of thing can start happening. 24th to the 27th is when we're going to start getting the NFL annual meetings. I think a lot of people remember the meme of Belichick drinking the orange juice. That's what those are. It's when a lot of like rule changes and things like that happen, where a lot of the big picture stuff for the NFL takes place, where you get coaches, you get owners, you get a lot of executives. They're going to be there deliberating basically the direction for the league in that year. So then we're going to move up to April. So this is going to be important for Jerod Mayo. Obviously, it's his first year as head coach of the Patriots. Clubs that hired a new head coach after the end of the 2023 regular season may begin off-season workout programs. So in prior years with Bill Belichick, the Patriots off-season workout program would have started around the 15th. Now it's going to be at the beginning of April, so they can kind of get an earlier jump because they have to cover more ground, considering this is going to be a brand new system that they're dealing with. All right, don't have clubs to test or conduct a physical examination. So that's a pretty big one. So obviously the draft is going to be at the end of April, 25th to the 27th, but visits can actually start on the 17th. So that's going to be about the time where you start seeing a lot of these visits happen, the top 30s. Those are going to be very important. You start seeing like Senior Bowl visits, Hula Bowl visits, Shrine Bowl visits, draft visits, or combine visits. Those are interviews, rather. I'm sorry. Those are important to a degree. It's a feeling out process, but the top 30 visits are the most important. That's where you can get a better sense of when these players or what the team's interest is in certain players. So that's another really important date. Let's see what else we got here. Anything else that's really big? The fifth-year option is going to be on May 2nd. Obviously, that's going to be Mac Jones for the Patriots. They're not expected to pick up his option, so I wouldn't expect anything there. And those are really the big ones that fans need to know. So like we said, just going back up to March, free agency begins on the 11th. The league year begins on the 13th, which is when transactions and things like that can actually be made. We have the owners' meetings at the end of March from the 24th to the 27th. And then Jerod Mayo and his players are probably going to have their beginning of their offseason workout program at the very beginning of April. Then you're going to start having visits then. And at the end of April, the moment we've been waiting for, and that will be way more exciting once free agency is over and that excitement dies down and we need something else to kind of get us going. Then we're going to have that at the end. And then May 2nd is, I don't know when exactly we're going to hear the news, but by May 2nd is going to be the deadline for teams to use the fifth-year option. For the Patriots, probably not going to happen. Mac Jones is likely not even going to be on the team in 2024, so not a big date in that regard. All right, let's move on, see what else we got here first. Ooh, let me get a good ratio, good aspect ratio. There we go. Okay. Get the questions. Is Calvin Ridley worth paying suck tax for? This is kind of a complicated one because I think there needs to be a limit. I think Calvin Ridley is the only one of the receivers on this market that really fits what the Patriots need. Now, if you look at his statistical output, he wasn't one of the elite receivers, and that's probably what he's going to get paid like just because of the supply and demand, and he is by far in his own tier on the open market. That said, I don't want the Patriots paying something like north of $25 million for him. That's legitimately elite wide receiver money, especially with Calvin Ridley being 29 years old. It's just not a great situation if you're paying a guy at that age. Although he was explosive, he was one of the better deep targets in the NFL last season. That's really what you're hoping to get out of him, and his ability to, well, he can win on one-on-one situations, and you can use him in that backside role that we saw with Amari Cooper a lot with the Browns and Alex Van Pelt's offense. I think he's a better option as a Z where you can move him around, or in the slot where you can create some maybe size and athleticism mismatches. But It depends on how bad the suck tax is. Again, if it's like $25 million, actually, if you want to see my interview earlier today with Jeff Howe, we actually touched on this a little bit in Calvin Ridley's situation, where I think there still has to be a limit. You can't just give guys whatever they want. Although I do think Ridley is a good player, a very good player even, he's not a great player. And when you sign players to certain deals and you overpay for them, it's not an overpay if it's a great player, because at some point that deal is going to look like a bargain. But if it's a good player or a very good player, again, especially one like Ridley, where you're probably going to sign him to something like a 2-year deal, I'm just not sure you want to tie up that much of your cap space to a guy like that. At the same time, the Patriots are in a really tough position where they don't have a lot of options on the free agent market. For them specifically, I think the second best option might be Kendrick Bourne. So that kind of gives you an idea of what they're dealing with in that situation. So will they have to pay the suck tax? Yeah, sure. But once it hits that $25 million per year mark, that's where I start getting a little bit hesitant. Which receivers from the current roster, Bourne included, should the Patriots keep? Is Booty even allowed to play? That's a good question. I do not expect so. I think these are going to be some pretty significant legal problems. I don't believe the league has handed down any sort of suspension or anything like that, at least not to my knowledge. But I wouldn't be surprised if something like that comes up. And also just given the situation surrounding Booty, I wish him the best, but I just really don't see him having any kind of role on the team this year. When it comes to Kendrick Bourne, I'd love to see him resign. He's been very vocal about wanting to come back to the Patriots. This could be a situation where they just want him to test his market, coming off an ACL injury where he was the Patriots' top receiver last year, but the Patriots were in dire need of a top receiver. So, how are teams going to view that situation? So he hits the open market most likely, sees what his value is, and as long as it's in a range that the Patriots are comfortable with, I would love to see him brought back. He's clearly a leader, brings so much energy, and he's got size, and we'll see how he is coming off of the ACL injury. We all know Kendrick Bourne. He's working his butt off to get back. But if he's lost a significant amount of explosiveness and is really just a possession guy who doesn't give you a lot after the catch, that worries me a little bit. But he's still a savvy route runner. He knows how to set guys up and get open. And he's physical. He's got good hands. And with the other guys on the market, you're talking like Marquise Brown and Darnell Mooney. I like Darnell Mooney a lot. I will say that. I love his explosiveness. He's an exciting player, but he's also pretty slim. And in Alex Van Pelt's offense, they're going to run the ball a lot. And I know that Elliott Wolf and the Packers system, they like receivers with some size. So I'm not sure how well Darnell Mooney would fit there. Marquise Brown, another guy who has inside-out versatility, but he's also undersized. And if Demario Douglas is going to have a big role, are you really going to have two undersized receivers getting a lot of snaps for you? I don't see that as a great possibility. So looking at the other Patriots receivers, Devontae Parker and Juju Smith-Schuster, I think the team is going to do what they can to try to trade them, save themselves as much money as possible, likely by making it a post-June 1st designation. I don't know what they're going to get back, maybe like a 7th for each guy or a 6th. These are going to have to be teams that are willing to trade, knowing that they are getting these players at a discounted rate. So not exactly great. Let's see. All right. Tyquan Thornton. Tyquan Thornton's an interesting one. 2nd round pick, obviously. You want to keep those kinds of guys around. But at the same time, he's really, really behind in his development. So it's an interesting situation. And obviously the injuries. Every year it seems like that's a problem. Now, I will say the speed and the explosiveness, I'd like to see if Alex Van Pelt can get the most out of him. Probably more in a niche role than maybe as a featured receiver. I would like to see what they could do with Tyquan Thornton, at least in training camp in the offseason program, see how he's utilized. Maybe he can really get it together with Alex Van Pelt's offense, that West Coast system, really emphasizing route running. With Troy Brown under his tutelage, Tyquan Thornton actually told me that he had freedom in his routes and was using his speed to set up defenders, which, just to be totally honest, when I watched the film, I didn't really agree with that mentality just because it seemed like there was a lot of wasted movement. He wasn't on the same page as quarterbacks, which caused some issues where quarterbacks had to hold on to the ball. And there wasn't a lot of separation anyway, so I didn't really see the benefit. But if he becomes a more disciplined route runner and really does understand how to use his speed without all the wasted movement, I think you could get something decent out of him as like a wide receiver 4 option maybe. And with, as few options as the Patriots have, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. And then beyond there, you've got Demario Douglas, who obviously is probably going to be one of the focal points of their offense, although you have to worry with his injury history and his size. Do you really want him being a guy that goes over the middle as a slot receiver? probably going to be more prominent on like outbreaking routes where he's away from those big guys in the middle of the field. And then Jalen Reagor, he's another guy where I'd be interested to bring him back, especially maybe as a return specialist. We really saw him thrive last season. Later on in the year, he had that kick return against Buffalo. That was fantastic. And then he actually flashed at times with Bailey Zappi. I also think that at this point in his career, he is what he is. I don't think he's going to take some big leap or anything like that, but he does have good speed. He's got some size to him. So if the Patriots just want to see what they can get out of him in camp and, maybe he does well and they can trade him or something like that, that'd be interesting. But I'd be interested in them bringing Reagor back just to see how he fits in the system, similar to like a Treyon Thorton. They're explosive guys who have time already on the Patriots. They understand the locker room. They're familiar with the place. So, I would be interested, but they're not really significant needle movers for me. All right, let's see what else we got here. How fun would it be to add another massive human blue chip player to the defensive line in free agency? Oh, that'd be a ton of fun. I would love to see that. Obviously, if you're talking, just people that are on the market currently or will most likely be on the market, Chris Jones is at the top of that list. He's a game wrecker. I will say that he's not someone who plays 100% all the time. You see that in his run defense stats, where I think he had like 10 tackles against the run last year, which is pretty unacceptable for somebody of his caliber. He does unfortunately take plays off, but at the same time, he was beloved in Kansas City. I'm sure he's still beloved in Kansas City and is a dominant pass rusher. This is a guy who's probably going to go into the Hall of Fame, 3-time Super Bowl champion, who I think you could argue is as valuable to that defense as Patrick Mahomes is to the offense, is somebody who is just such a dominant presence that can completely take over games on his side of the ball. But at the same time, I think he actually posted earlier today something kind of cryptic where it was a picture of him and Andy Reid after the Super Bowl celebrating and an hour-long phone call with the Chiefs. So he may be going back to KC, but the most realistic option would be Christian Wilkins from the Dolphins. Maybe he reunites with Devon Gotcha on the inside as like Lawrence Guy replacement. Obviously not just in terms of that niche role, but as that kind of other defensive tackle that's heavy in the rotation. You could use him and Christian Barmore in a significant role. Those are your top two guys. And then you have Devon Gotcha maybe playing more on early downs and also when they're 5-man fronts. I really like Christian Wilkins. I do think he's more of a penetrator than a space eater and someone who you want two-gapping a lot. But that said, he can execute multiple assignments. He's not somebody who's really scheme dependent. He does get moved off the ball by double teams, which worries me a bit. But at the same time, if you want, you can limit his role a bit. He played a ton of snaps in Miami. With the Patriots, we know they like to rotate pretty heavily. So maybe that would help a little bit. You put him in some more advantageous situations. But him and Barmore inside, I think that sets you up pretty well. And I also understand there was some trepidation about, obviously, Christian Barmore is a candidate to get an extension, and he's probably going to make money near or at the top of his position. Probably not at the top because Chris Jones is about to get paid. He's not going to be making Chris Jones money. And I think he wants to be paid like the highest paid defensive lineman maybe in league history. But again, I like Wilkins next to Barmore. I think they'd be a really good duo. And if you do sign them both to big contracts, I think you just adjust to that by maybe on the edges. You're not paying big money for those guys, kind of like we've seen from the Patriots. On the edges, you really are going to want guys who are better at contain and are really disciplined rushers so that when that havoc is wrecked inside and quarterbacks get a little antsy, you can compress the pocket and not give them anywhere to go. But I love that idea. If you're talking about big bodies that you could add to the defensive line, another guy is Dennard Hunter. He's an older guy. He's 29 years old, but was one of the most productive defense or edge defenders in the NFL. Played in Brian Flores' system, which of course is pretty similar to what the Patriots do, although he is even more aggressive. I think DeMarcus Covington mentioned that he would like to be more aggressive this season, or that was just reported, one or the other. The scheme shouldn't change too much, but if Dennard Hunter can fit in that system, I think he can fit with the Pats. Maybe in a role more like a Dietrich Wise, where in their 4-down fronts, he plays as a defensive end with his hand down, although he can stand up. That's not really where he thrives, though. And then in certain pass rush fronts, you could bump him down inside, create some mismatches against interior offensive linemen. Now, Hunter isn't the most explosive edge defender you're going to get on the market, but he can contribute against the run and the pass, which is big. He's not going to be a guy that you have to take off the field depending on the situation. He's savvy. He's disciplined. He can take advantage when offensive lineman's technique isn't very good. I'm curious how much money he's going to ask for. I'm not trying to pay top dollar for him, but if he's someone you could have at a decent price, maybe like $10 million or less, somewhere around that market, I think that could be, decent for a guy who could play every snap for you. And he was actually voted a captain for the first time in his Vikings career. He spent his entire career in Minnesota. But first-year captain, so you get a little bit of that leadership in the building as well. And actually, if you want a bit of a deeper dive into Danielle Hunter, I released a piece this morning on the top free agent options for the Patriots if they want to add that elite defender, as we've seen reported. To be honest, there's not a whole lot of elite defenders left, but there are some guys who can at least be game changers and impact players for you. So, yeah, Chris Jones, Christian Wilkins, Danielle Hunter are kind of the guys that are at the top of the list for me if you're talking about those high-impact, bigger guys that you could add to the trenches. Actually, we're at the 20-minute mark, so I've been going on for a long time. Let me throw it over to our friends at PrizePicks to show them some love. Be right back. Football season may be over, but the action on the floor is heating up. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of year. Get in on the excitement with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. Want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like Meek Mill and Sugar Sean O'Malley? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. PrizePicks even offers injury insurance so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and doesn't return in the second, that player projection won't count against you and the rest of your entry stays live. With Jason Tatum going for the MVP, I'm taking more on his points and rebounds. Download the app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, so I do see some comments saying, I'd rather extend Judon over Hunter. I completely understand that. But remember, the Patriots have $100 million in cap space. I'm not going to say they can do whatever the hell they want, but they can kind of do whatever the hell they want. And it's also a pretty depreciated market in terms of, the high impact players that you can get. So I agree, I wouldn't put Danielle Hunter at the top of the list by any means. But if they're talking about wanting to add, that kind of talent, I do think he's someone who's in the mix. You can extend Judon. You can still do that and sign Danielle Hunter. Just kind of depends on who is actually an option, who ends up coming off the board, who they really want to pay for, or maybe not overpay for, certain things like that. But again, I understand. I wouldn't put Danielle Hunter as like a priority or anything like that, but he is one of the few truly consistently impactful players left on the market right now, specifically when you talk about the defensive line. All right, now moving on, let's get another question in here. Would you rather go tackle or wide receiver at the top of the second? Obviously, it matters who's there. Outside of the guys we need to re-sign, who are your favorite free agent targets? So I kind of touched on that with the free agent wide receivers. Calvin Ridley is the only guy that I really, really like. Darnell Mooney is really intriguing because he's so explosive, but again, I don't love his frame. One thing I noticed when watching him is that defenders tend to be able to get into the catch point because he doesn't have a lot of weight on him. So that's one issue. He also kind of struggled with drops and fell off a bit towards the end of last season. But that said, he is an outstanding separator. And for a skinnier, more slim-framed guy, he does a good job getting defenders' hands off of him and separating both with his stem and in his release, and also making sure that he can get himself clean at the top. And he does have good hands. He can make catches outside of his frame, some pretty spectacular ones as well. But there is some inconsistency there because of his size. So really, it's Calvin Ridley and I guess Curtis Samuel. You could put him in there as well. He's a pretty consistent guy, really good hands, another good route runner, was successful for the Commanders, has battled injuries, so there's that to consider as well. But yeah, for the free agent market, it's just not looking really great. Now, getting back to the beginning of the question, would I rather go tackle or wide receiver? So if you saw my mock draft, another shameless plug, go check that out on CLNS Media if you already haven't. I did my first mock draft of the offseason, had a lot of fun with that. But there I actually double dipped at tackle. For the first one, I went with Kingsley Suamatea out of BYU in the second round. He's only 21 years old. He was a team captain. He's cousins with all-pro right tackle for the Lions, Penei Sewell. It's a pretty good resume. Now, he is someone who's still pretty raw. So he's probably going to have to sit for a year. And that's kind of where last night I actually spoke with Alex Barth when we did our best damn show of the week, best damn day of the week show when we talked about college football. He kind of talked me into the idea of a receiver in the second round of the draft. Initially, I was really hesitant, and I was saying, all right, get your quarterback, get your offensive tackle, and then get as many weapons as you can find after that you like. But at the same time, more likely than not, they're not going to be able to get an offensive tackle who can start right away. And we're really going to have a better understanding of what they're feeling like the direction is at the offensive tackle spot once free agency hits. Are they going to sign, a Jonah Williams or Donovan Smith or, re-sign Trent Brown? Super unlikely. But if they sign a veteran, they're likely going to want that tackle to develop. And I think there are some guys later on in the draft, I'll touch on this more, that I do think they could pick up who could potentially be starters maybe within a year, maybe within a couple years, where you sign a veteran to that contract and you just let them grow and develop. So if you're going to have them on the bench anyway, I think it does make some sense in the second round to try to get a receiver that can be an impact player quickly. Someone like a Ricky Pearsall, for example, or, there's some guys that might go in the second round, like an A.D. Mitchell or someone who may fall to them at that spot because they're so early in the second round. It's almost like getting guys right at the end of the first. So I am pretty open to the idea of a wide receiver over an offensive tackle because I don't think that offensive tackle would be a contributor right away, whereas a receiver, even if they're in more of a niche role or a rotational role, you'd still be able to get something out of them immediately. All right, good question, though. Let's check the comments. Let's see. Oh, this is a fun one. You say you like Jaden Daniels, yet whenever you talk about him, you don't acknowledge his value being the same as May and often say you'd like it better if the Pats traded down. So I've seen a couple comments about this on my Twitter. I have been very vocal. I like Jaden Daniels. I like Drake May. I like them for different reasons, and I dislike them for different reasons. Now, Jaden Daniels obviously had an outstanding season where he went from someone who wasn't on most people's radars in 2022 to a Heisman winner in 2023. You can't argue with his success. The guy who's the best deep ball passer in college football, you put him and Penix kind of in that same category, and he is an electric runner. He's going to walk into the NFL as maybe the second or third best running quarterback in the league behind like a Lamar Jackson or a Justin Fields, because those guys are just absolutely different. I do think Jaden Daniels has some elusiveness to his game more than he sometimes gets credit for. Some people think he's just a straight line guy. I don't think that's necessarily true. But at the same time, his deficiencies do scare me. And that's really why, I try to mention the value. I mean, the value's out there. You don't need me to tell you that they're two of the top three quarterbacks in this draft. And everybody knows that. That's what the buzz is. That's what NFL teams are saying. It is lying season, but this momentum's been building for a while. It's not really anything too surprising. But that said, Jaden is an older prospect. I'm also scared about his frame because we've already seen, everybody likes to make the comparison to Lamar Jackson. I don't think it's great outside of their athleticism and the fact that they both kind of entered the league with slimmer bodies. But look how many times we've seen Lamar Jackson get hurt. Through his career, he's had to build more muscle so that he can withstand more hits, even though he does a pretty good job protecting his body. And Jaden Daniels does not. Can he learn to do that? Maybe he takes one big hit in the league and is like, I can't do this anymore? Sure. But we also saw him do that against Alabama, a team that is full of NFL caliber players. Usually a lot of the NFL players end up coming from Alabama, a lot of the best ones. And, he takes that big shot. Sometimes he ends up not even finishing the game because of the hits he takes. Those kinds of things do scare me. Other things that scare me. And when I spoke to Jeff Howe this morning, he mentioned that teams aren't really worried about the hand size and the arm strength. I understand that those guys are smarter than me, but I can only give you my opinion. And with Jaden Daniels, I got to say, the fact that he struggles so much on drive throws, we know he has success throwing deep, but he is hitting outside the numbers on fades where Mac Jones can hit those as well. It doesn't take crazy arm strength to hit receivers downfield on things like go balls and fades and routes like that. Where you really see arm strength is really about 20 yards or deeper when you're trying to hit a comeback or an out route, where you really need to put the ball on a line and fit it into tight coverage. That's where I see Jaden Daniels just doesn't have the arm of a guy like Drake May. So you get the arm strength, you have the size, you have the age. Those are all concerns for me. There's also, he's got some happy feet in the pocket. It's not the worst thing in the world because he will stand in there and take a hit. His pocket presence is good. I don't want to knock him for that or anything, but the happy feet do kind of scare me because they can lead to some inconsistencies. And then you look at Drake May. Now, Drake May is full of inconsistencies. No one is saying he's not. He does have a tendency to not be able to just let a play die and live to fight another down. His footwork can just be a mess where you'll see multiple wide misses in a game that are admittedly very alarming. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it in any way. He also tends to drift towards his target when he's throwing, and that kind of ties into the choppy footwork and the inconsistent footwork. And then he ends up drifting into pressure and getting himself in trouble. That said, The concerns I have for Jaden Daniels are concerns I don't have with Drake May. The age, the size, the arm. He's got those things in spades. He's the youngest quarterback in this class. He's got a massive arm where you see a lot of the best quarterbacks can make that throw where you kind of drift back and you just lollipop that thing in the air and it travels like 50 yards and it's just easy. Drake May has that kind of potential. He can also just put the ball wherever he wants. Again, it isn't consistent, but he has moments of outstanding deep accuracy. Now, on top of that, he's 230 pounds. Like, it's very different when Jaden Daniels is going to say, I'm going to put my shoulder down against a small linebacker or a safety versus when Drake May does it. I also think that Drake May is the second best running quarterback in this class. He's got a good sense for when he needs to scramble, when his receiver options just aren't very good. He can be used on design runs. I think he's somewhere where the entire playbook is open to you because he's got good mobility, and he's even got some elusiveness in space where, sometimes guys just don't really want to hit him and didn't want to hit him in college because he was so big, and he's kind of nifty. He's not like, he's not going to juke a bunch of guys out of their shoes necessarily, but he does a pretty good job of making guys miss in space. And I also like his instincts as a passer. And I've had people ask, what the hell does that mean? What are instincts? Well, his pocket feel. He does have a good sense of how to evade pressure when it comes and navigate the pocket. I think he does a good job of anticipating when windows are going to open or knowing what certain defenders, the way they move in coverage, how it affects different windows. Is outside of structured playmaking ability where he can reel it in at times, of course. But, you can say that about a lot of young quarterbacks who have similar skill sets where in college you can get away with a lot of things. And there's not a lot of guys who have that ability but do it in more of a confined space where like Caleb Williams and Drake are both in that kind of category. I don't think Drake puts the ball in harm's way nearly as much as a Caleb Williams does, although Caleb Williams does have a higher ceiling. And then you look at like a Jaden Daniels where he does run at times to throw, but more often than not, he's running to run because he knows how electric he is. So those are all the things I like in Drake May, and the concerns are things I feel like you can fix. Like, we're not talking about these guys are not going to be the same quarterbacks, hopefully, if they're in the right systems and have the right tutelage. They're not going to be the same quarterbacks coming out of college that they are in their third seasons or at the end of their rookie deals. Like, you're hoping that you can purge some of the weaknesses of these guys and then try to bring out the best in what they have. With Jaden Daniels, a lot of the things I don't like about his game are things you cannot fix. The progression stuff, I think he got better at that and can continue to. So I've seen him knocked for that. But like Drake May, I'm like, hey, good coaching. I think that's something that can be worked out at some point. Also takes some effort from players to put in the work and be able to do all those things and make it better. And I think Jaden Daniels and Drake May are both going to be outstanding leaders, high character guys who work their butts off and try to be the best they can be. But I think Drake May has a much higher ceiling. And I think that if he's able to sit and kind of develop and hone his skills a little bit more and refine that footwork, I just think you're going to get a lot more out of him when you're looking at 3 years down the line that you will from Jaden Daniels, although I'm also sure he's going to have an outstanding career. So I hope I put that to bed. I like both guys. I just like Drake May's ceiling a lot more than I like Jaden's, although I think Jaden's going to be able to contribute sooner, and I do think he's going to have a very successful NFL career. There are a lot of comments. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything related to this specific topic. Anything? Nope. Okay, we'll move on. Let's see the next question. If the Patriots sign an outside receiver like Calvin Ridley, do you think they draft another in day 2 like Tez Walker or Brendan Rice? And for a veteran offensive tackle, what do you think of Donovan Smith? Yeah, I think the Patriots are going to take a wide receiver on day 2, regardless of what happens in the offseason. There's way too much talent in this class. And when you talk about, I'm not a fan of Tez Walker personally. He's way too inconsistent. I don't like the drops. I think drops are an overrated kind of quirk with some receivers, not quirk or weakness, rather. If you're a good player, drops are going to happen. We've seen it with Tyreek Hill. We've seen it with Edelman. I think the bigger thing is more when the drops happen. That's more important than just dropping. It's like, all right, if you're dropping, like go-ahead scores and, what could be 50-yard plays, that's scary. But a lot of players have the ability to make up for those mistakes. But Tez Walker, especially seeing him at the Senior Bowl, that really made me nervous because that was a showcase where it's your last opportunity to show teams what you can do in a really competitive setting with the pads on against other players that aren't familiar with you. And it felt like anytime somebody was on his hip or anytime there was contact, he just got shook. He was shaken, all those shook words. But yeah, he just kind of makes me nervous. So I'm not a big Tez Walker guy. I do like Brendan Rice. I thought he had a good showing at the Senior Bowl, where the first day I remember seeing people say like, oh, he's not getting separation. And it was because guys were holding on for dear life trying to cover him, but he still was able to do a really good job of fighting through contact and still making the catch, which says a lot. I love receivers who fight through contact. I also think he's got underrated speed. He's not his dad or anything like that, but I will say that I think, especially for a bigger guy who's probably going to be more of an X, I think he's got enough where if he can win in the route, he can create enough separation where he can get behind defenders, although I don't think he's going to necessarily be a field stretcher, but I do like him a lot. And I mentioned Ricky Pearsall, Xavier Legette's another guy I really like. He was a team captain, a guy who's overcome a ton of adversity. I have a lot of respect for him. He told me that he had a meeting with the Patriots and that he really liked them. The vibe was great, and that went well. But yeah, Roman Wilson, if he's your cup of tea, I love him as a blocker. He's an explosive target. Probably going to be more of a Z slot kind of player in the at the next level. So I think there's a ton of talent on day 2 at wide receiver. So absolutely, I would be stunned if they don't end up getting a receiver either in the second or the third round. In the veteran offensive tackle, if Trent Brown is not an option, and then they try to get Jonah Williams and it doesn't work out, I think he's the best left tackle option on the market for them. I would say Donovan Smith is the next best thing. But he has won Super Bowls in back-to-back seasons. So, like, not back-to-back seasons, but he's a 2-time Super Bowl champion. You have to have a lot of respect for what he's been able to do. He is been a very good player. I'm trying to just find a nice way to say this. But the past 2 seasons, he's steadily declined. I think you really kind of saw it in the Super Bowl. He's not the player he used to be. He's getting up there in age. He also probably wants to keep playing for a contender unless he really just wants a last payday. I mean, when you get that itch, like we've seen in the Dynasty series, you get that itch and you really start liking winning championships, it's kind of hard to go back on that, again, unless you're just trying to get paid. So I'm not sure how realistic an option he is. I also think that you can do better. But if you're just looking for a bridge option who it's like, all right, this guy's not going to be an active liability, then Donovan Smith is probably a good backup plan to Jonah Williams, again, if they decide that they don't want to bring back a Trent Brown. What do we say here? All right. Anyway, you see the Pats draft Bazooka Joe Milton at Tennessee. Sure. I mean, if they decide they want to double dip, I'm not sure how good of an idea it is to double dip. We saw it with RG3 and Kirk Cousins, obviously, but it could create a weird situation. Of course, if it's a first-round quarterback and a 4th or 5th-round quarterback, Joe Milton's probably going to go in the 4th. It could create a weird dynamic. I think it really will be dependent on the quarterback coach and the offensive coordinator to make sure that it's a healthy relationship. And that's what Alex Van Pelt's known for, right? He's a glue guy. He's someone who brings a great energy to the offense, especially if you get somebody like Jacoby Brissett in the room in free agency, where he's someone who can, again, bring those good vibes, make sure everybody has perspective and is working together rather than feeling like, they're working against each other like we saw with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi. But yeah, with Joe, there's so much talent. And we know that Ben McAdoo likes his traits. We have seen some steady progression from Joe Milton at times. Like in the Senior Bowl, we saw that he was more willing to take some underneath stuff and not just nuke it downfield. Although he, as we saw in the combine drills, where he's like taking his drop back, pausing, then throwing 70 yards in the air. Like, that's insane. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them take a guy like Joe Milton, who has so many traits that you maybe want to build on. He's got the size. He's got the personality. I thought that really showed in the Senior Bowl, the way that he was attentive with his coaches and he was helping his teammates out, making sure everybody was on the same page. Love the personality. Love the skill set. I don't love his game right now, but he's going to be a developmental prospect. So, yeah, again, wouldn't be a total surprise. I could definitely see that. All right, the last one. It's my favorite part. Dream offseason plan. I got you. I took some time. I thought about it. I went through the different phases of the offseason. So I'll pull that up and let's go through my dream offseason. Make sure this is big enough for you guys. All right. So first up, for the free agent re-signings, for the offense, you got to bring back Mike Nwenu. I think that's a non-starter. Like, if you're going to bring anybody back, it needs to be your versatile offensive lineman who has worked his butt off for you, who's still young, emerged a bit as a leader last season. And with their offensive line situation, there's no excuse not to bring Mike Nwenu back. If you got to pay a premium for him, you got to pay a premium for him. You also got to send a message in the locker room that you're going to reward your homegrown players who develop, play well, and do the things that you want to see out of them. So Mike Nwenu should be, even if he tests the market and gets a better idea for his value, Patriots better match it. That's all I got to say. Kendrick Bourne, like I mentioned earlier, not going to go too much deeper into this, but the wide receiver market is not good. He's someone who can be a vocal leader. He brings such great energy. Big fan of Kendrick Bourne. I think they got to bring him back, whether it's as a wide receiver 3, 4, whatever it is, as a rotational player, as he kind of comes back from the injury and gets back to full speed and full strength. I really do think they need to bring him back. Hunter Henry, another leader. He was a captain for the first time with the Patriots last season. He actually was also a captain with the Chargers. So it wasn't his first time being a captain, just the first time being a captain in New England. He isn't explosive anymore. That's just kind of the reality. He's not slow, but really he more wins with being nuanced and with route running more than he does with explosive ability. He doesn't give you anything after the catch, but he's a good enough run blocker. He's not a people mover, but he'll do his job. And with all the changes that are going on in the locker room, I think retaining a leader like him, especially considering he's probably going to make like half of what he was making on his 2021 salary, where he's averaging like $12.5 million. I believe Brad Spielberger of PFF has him making about like 6.5. That's much more reasonable for a player where the knee issues are consistent. He missed time with the Patriots for the first season last year, ended up getting placed on IR. There's a lot of things where, you don't want to commit a lot of money to him, but you definitely, for the Patriots, I think he's more valuable to them than he would be to anybody else. And then Pharaoh Brown has experience in Alex Van Pelt's offense, spent last year in New England, can be a dominant blocker at times. Also, chipped in a little bit as a receiver. He's a tough tackle, so he made some plays underneath. Made some plays down the seam as well. Is just a big body who has strong hands. Love to see Pharaoh Brown back, and it sounds like the Patriots are making some progress in that department. Now on defense, we got Kyle Duggar, obviously received the transition tag. With all the moves that have gone on today or over the past week, all these safeties that are getting released to save money. It seems like it's the running back market where nobody really wants to pay safeties, especially older guys who are in their 30s. Now, Kyle Duggar's 28. Or either will be 28 or is 28. So he does have a bit of leverage over those guys. But, Miguel Benzon, friend of the show, Pat's Cap on Twitter, mentioned, hey, if I'm Kyle Duggar, I'm signing that right now, trying to get my $13.8 million to make sure the price tag doesn't get any lower. I think he has a pretty good chance of being retained. Plus, the Patriots have his rights. So they obviously have right of first refusal. But if he goes somewhere else, they don't get any compensation. But I think he'll be back. Anthony Jennings was one of their best playmakers on defense. He was, I believe, second in the NFL in tackles for loss or no game among edge defenders behind like Max Crosby. And that's as someone who only plays in run situations. So he was really good. Doesn't give you a lot as a pass rusher, which depreciates his value. And I think it'll keep him in a range where the Patriots will be comfortable. And again, rewarding your homegrown guys. You didn't give him a lot of playing opportunities during the early part of his career, although he did show up in those run situations and flash when he did get those chances. But now with such an impactful player who can get offenses behind the chains and create obvious passing situations, he's so valuable to them. I'd be surprised if he ends up elsewhere unless somebody just overpays for him, which for a run defender, I don't think that's very likely. Miles Bryant, I'm not sure if Jalen Mills is going to come back to the team. So somebody like Miles Bryant who can play slot for you, he can play outside, he can be a safety, as we saw when they had injuries at the position with Jabril Peppers late in the season. And he's got experience. He's well respected. He's so tough. He works hard. Bill Belichick just raved about him any opportunity he got. As long as he's affordable, comes at a team-friendly price, I think it makes a lot of sense to bring a Miles Bryant back, even if the Patriots try to go in more of a youthful direction and give those younger guys more opportunities in the defensive back room. But even still, even as a rotational guy, as someone who's on the field for early downs when they're playing zone coverage, where you try to protect him from those man coverage situations, I think Miles Bryant's somebody that you really want to bring back. Josh Uche, this one may surprise some people. I really thought long and hard about it, but looking at the market, the options are really to re-sign Josh Uche or like overpay for someone like a Bryce Huff, who's not going to be an every down player for you, but is still going to command a little under $20 million. I think it's going to be something like 16 to 19 million, something like that. I just think that's too much money for someone who's not going to play a heavy role. And as we know with the Patriots, if they do bring back Jennings, you got Matthew Judon, you got Keon White, you're going to have Jennings. That's a lot of mouths to feed already. And I think, as you'll see later in the list, that they're also going to bring in potentially a younger player to add some depth and just, more youth to the position, which they don't really have outside of Keon White. Even if he ends up being a Judon replacement, you'd like somebody who can maybe contribute on every down, even if early on they're just a rotational pass rusher. So Josh Uche on a one-year deal we're in this new system with Drew Wilkins. Maybe he can get his groove back, get back to that 2022 success that we saw from him, because it was just a funky year last year. We saw him break out in 2022, and then whether it was because of the scheme where he was asked to play more contained, there was a foot injury midseason that may have had something to do with it as well. He just wasn't as productive. So bring him back on a modest one-year deal, see if he can get back to those heights, and then maybe work from there. We got Mack Wilson Sr., who the team admitted they didn't use him properly during his first season with the team in 2022. Then we saw him used as more of a coverage linebacker. He also added some weight and muscle, which I think was huge, because you saw him get off blocks much more effectively than he was doing in his first season with the team and even in prior seasons in the league. So one, I think he can maybe be not an every down contributor, because Jelani Tavai is the early down linebacker, but in that passing situation role where he's either inside as a coverage player or bumping down to the line of scrimmage as a pass rusher, which is a skill set we didn't even know he had until last season. It also sounds like he's reportedly one of the players that not only do they want to re-sign, but someone who wants to come back. I think he had off-season surgery as well, which was incredible that he even played through that. I think he was playing through an injury for months. So he seems like someone they definitely bring back. And then Jalen Mills. I don't know how realistic it is. This is my dream offseason, so I would like to see Jalen Mills back. Great personality. He did whatever he was asked to. He did have that comment last season saying where it seemed like he was not happy with how little he was being used. But after that, it seemed like his role did increase. Had some inconsistencies in man coverage, but I liked what he did bring as a rotational player. Really good in the slot as a blitzer and as a run defender. He's just so aggressive and so fiery. So Patriots can bring him back. I'd love to see it, but I could also see him potentially leaving for a full-time role elsewhere. Now, going to the free agent signings, top of the list, got to be Jacoby Brissett. I don't have to talk about this one too much. I've talked about it in like every show this week. Everybody loves Jacoby. He played really well for the Commanders in limited time last season, has experience in Alex Van Pelt's offense. It's kind of just a no-brainer signing. Running back, either Zach Moss of the Colts or Antonio Gibson of the Commanders. Now, Zach Moss had a lot of success before Jonathan Taylor signed and returned to the Colts kind of in the middle of last season. He was one of the more productive backs in the entire NFL, showed good vision. He was a tough tackle. I think he'd be a really good 1-2 punch with Ramondre Stevenson. I'm just not sure if Ezekiel Elliott comes back. I also think that Zach Moss gives you a bit more juice than you got from Ezekiel Elliott, although I have a ton of respect for him. He was a great guy to cover and have in the locker room. I just, again, think that Zach Moss gives you a little bit more because he's younger. But if Zach Moss doesn't work out, I'd also like to see someone like Antonio Gibson, where you maybe have him as more of a receiving back. He's really well known for previously being a wide receiver who turned into a running back, and he's someone where you can target him downfield. You can have him on option routes. He's someone that gives you a little bit more versatility. Probably don't want him running the ball a ton because his vision isn't really great. He likes to bounce runs a lot, which Patriots typically don't like. Even if, the Patriots are incorporating more of an outside zone scheme or a run scheme where they try to hit the perimeter more often. I just, I don't see him having a heavy role as a runner, but as a receiver, I think he could be that third down back that the team's been lacking for quite some time. Calvin Ridley is a receiver. I already talked about that. Not going to get too much into that. Noah Fant. I really wanted Dalton Schultz. I thought he was the best option, not only just in the free agent market, but around the league in terms of the guys who had any shot at being available because he's one of the few true dual threats in the NFL. He's a good run blocker, dominant even at times where, he had some pancakes last season. He's also a really athletic and dynamic pass catcher, and he can line up both in line and off the line of scrimmage. You can flex him out. There's not a lot of guys in the NFL who can do that. That's also why you saw him get paid by the Texans. But Noah Fant is someone, he's more of a flex. He doesn't have the same kind of versatility. And he's also been pretty underutilized in the teams he's been in. He was at Denver, where there's an offense that doesn't throw to their tight ends a whole lot over the past few seasons. And then last year with the Seahawks, there's just so many weapons on that team. It makes sense that he wasn't a featured target. But he's got a lot of juice where you hit him underneath. He can turn it into a big gain if you give him a runway. He made some pretty crazy catches last season as well. He's got really good hands. Not the biggest guy, but he's got good enough size and a wide catch radius where he'll go out and try to make catches outside of his frame. So if the Patriots are looking to add a dynamic athlete at tight end to kind of complement Hunter Henry and Pharaoh Brown, who we know aren't really the most explosive athletes, I really like Noah Fant in that role. Left tackle, mentioned it before, Jonah Williams. If you can't get him, bring in Donovan Smith as just a stopgap while you try to develop a younger offensive tackle that you get in the draft. And then Graham Glasgow. Now, this one may kind of throw people off. Backup interior lineman for the Detroit Lions over the past few years. The Patriots really struggled last season with their line depth, largely because the interior didn't have any veteran backups. You had James Ferentz, but we saw him get put in the game and then quickly get pulled out because, as we saw, he retired. He just didn't have it in him anymore. And then you had to have guys like Antonio Mafi, who probably shouldn't have played at all his rookie season. I liked what he was showing at times, especially against the Cowboys, but then he kind of just fell off a cliff. He's got a lot of work he's got to do. I'm excited to see what Scott Peters can do to help him develop because he is a converted nose tackle. He's still learning the position. But I think they could really use a veteran presence on the interior of the offensive line to kind of help out if somebody goes down. I think Graham Glasgow is the best option on the market. And then on defense, I mentioned Christian Wilkins. Fingers crossed. I would love to see him kind of slide in as another one of their top interior defensive linemen. And Dane Jackson of the Buffalo Bills, another guy who isn't really talked about very much, maybe slides under the radar, but I was impressed with his tape watching him. I think he does really well in man coverage. I think he's got some fire as a run defender as well, and he's going to come cheap. I think that PFF has him projected to make less than $3 million on a one-year kind of prove-it contract. So I do like, Alex Austin. I hope that maybe he can seize a larger role in the defense, maybe as a starter opposite Gonzalez. You also got Isaiah Bolden. Marco Wilson's under contract with the team. They do have a lot of bodies, but if they want someone who's got some NFL tape, has experience, Marco Wilson kind of fits in that category, but I think Dane Jackson's a little bit better. So if he's inexpensive and in that Bill scheme, they run every coverage in the book. They're very multiple. So he's clearly a high IQ player. I would like him as kind of a veteran presence where worst case scenario, if you like what you got from your young guys or who's already on the roster, you can cut him and you probably save money and don't really have any repercussions from that. Moving on to draft picks. So day one, quarterback. Drake May is my number one, as I said earlier. Jaden Daniels, no slouch, as my second favorite quarterback in this realm. Now, I put J.J. McCarthy. If the Patriots decided they didn't love Jaden Daniels or, something happened where they ended up wanting to trade back, that's where you're probably going to get more into J.J. McCarthy territory. I don't like him early in the draft. I don't really agree with the whole talk of him being top 5. I think that's pretty ludicrous. I understand there's a QB tax. That's a little rich for my blood. But I see the tools. I understand why people are excited about him. And if you're talking about potentially sitting a quarterback for the season, I think J.J. McCarthy is a guy who could really benefit from that. And we know, again, McAdoo likes his tools. I think J.J. McCarthy has some. He's fast. He's got a big arm. And he can really show some incredible accuracy over the middle of the field. Does have issues throwing to his left. Nate Tice did a great job breaking that down in his scouting report or, entire breakdown of J.J. McCarthy. So there are things to be concerned about for sure. But if the Patriots end up trading, I do think he's probably their best option a little later in the early part of the first round. Day two, I want to see them go wide receiver. Xavier Legette, Ricky Pearsall, Brendan Rice. I touched on those guys. One of them, there's a lot of people. Maybe somebody slips because there's just so much depth on the offensive side of the ball. Some positions going to end up having guys that get pushed back. So, whether that's like an A.D. Mitchell or one of those Texas guys, something like that. Maybe not Xavier Worthy. I love his speed, and I think he is a good player, especially in his routes. But I don't really love the size. The size scares the dickens out of me. So I don't love him there. But some day two wide receiver who you think can make a pretty immediate impact on the team. And then a tackle on day two, whether it's the third round or the second round, whichever. A Kingsley Suamatea, like I said, Patrick Paul, a Kieran. I'm going to try to pronounce it. I'm sorry if I butcher it. Amegaji, I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm sorry if I don't. Out of Yale. I think those are some guys who are probably going to sit their first years. Maybe they come in if there's injuries or something like that, or you try to get them some time so they get experience. But I think those are guys who have really good floors and ceilings. I'm sorry, more ceilings, because their floors are a little limited by their inexperience and need to gain a little bit more refinement. But I do like them as guys who could potentially start at left tackle for New England. Moving on to day three. I like the Patriots to double dip at offensive tackle because they've kind of ignored offensive tackle outside of the sixth round and later for quite a few years. And I think not having a lot of young players at the position has really hurt them. We saw last year where they had to keep kind of throwing veterans at the wall to see what sticks, and that did not work out. It made sense for that season because I think taking offensive linemen, you could argue they could have taken one in the first round, but I'm not going to argue against taking Christian Gonzalez. But even then, I think a lot of those guys were more guards who could play at tackle, but they just put themselves in a bad situation because they didn't have any depth or developmental players at the position. So here, Javon Foster, Roger Rosengarten, Travis Glover, those are guys I thought had some good moments at the Senior Bowl. I'd be really intrigued to see what they could do under Scott Peters with some more refined technique while they get to sit for a year or two and then get to slide in and maybe make some contributions either as backups or as eventual starters. Then also the tight end position. There is a huge drop-off after Brock Bowers. It's Brock Bowers, then you got Jatavian Sanders is in the next tier. It's not particularly close. And then there's a pretty steep gap. But the day 3 guys are nothing to cough at. I think that's the phrase. I don't know. But these are some legit dudes who I think, like the receivers, can contribute from day 1. They may not be starters for you, but I think that they can make quick impacts. Like a Cade Stover out of Ohio State, Theo Johnson, who had one of the best relative athletic scores in history, scored a 9.99. Only Zach Kuntz of the New York Jets had one that was better. So he's another guy, just that Penn State legacy of freak athletes. He'd be an interesting piece. Ben Sinnott, who had some really nice moments at the Senior Bowl as well. He's a versatile piece. Jaheim Bell, who's more of like a flex option. You move him around the formation, try to create mismatches, maybe put him in the backfield. I think he could be a fun piece if you can get good value for him. And AJ Barner, he's a guy I think can contribute as a blocker immediately. I also think he's got underrated receiving ability. Now, he was more of the second tight end for Michigan and obviously a very run-heavy attack, which is why you saw how good of a blocker he was. But beyond that, I think that there were moments where you really saw, okay, he's got some receiving prowess. He can pluck the ball out of the air. He's got good hands. He's got good movement ability. Not the most explosive guy, but I do think if you double dipped at tight end, as I did in my mock draft this week, where I got Stover and I got AJ Barner, I think if you're looking 3 years down the line, those are 2 guys who can be pretty significant contributors for you and potentially starters who kind of run the offense through. I think that'd be pretty exciting. So day 3, I'd love to see them get some of those talented tight ends. Running backs. Now, the Patriots have a lot of bodies at running back right now behind Ramondre Stevenson. Not a lot of guys to get super excited about, though. You got Kevin Harris, who had some nice moments, especially against the Bills, although he did have that one bad play. But beyond that, it's just nothing really exciting. Like Jermichael Hasty, who never even got to play, probably because he was still picking up the system. They had somebody else too. Kenyon Barner, I think it was. Kenyon Barner. Just not great depth at the running back spot in terms of the quality players who you want to get on the field. And I think on day 3, they can find that running back spot. Dylan Laube. I don't watch a lot of college football in season, so a lot of these guys, I read their names. I've never heard them say it out loud before, but he is someone who has met with the Patriots. I love his versatility. I love his burst. In college, you see so many times he just loves that gap scheme. He told me he likes to run the gap scheme that UNH ran more often in his last season, where he'll kind of press inside and explode outside. And then defenders, so often you see them take the wrong angle and then he rips them off for big plays. But even more than that, I think he's going to make his living as a receiving back, where you can split him out, you can put him in the slot, you can keep him in the backfield, and he creates some serious mismatches due to both his route running and his exceptional hands and ball tracking ability. But then you got Isaac Garendo out of Louisville. He's another really exciting guy. He's a big back with really good speed. He's an intriguing guy who blew up the combine, kind of got on people's radars more. Ray Davis out of Kentucky. Dylan Johnson, who got hurt later in the year for Washington, but was really good for them when he was healthy. And Frank Gore Jr., who's really an interesting guy out of Southern Miss. He actually played quarterback at times as like a super back because they had some injuries. So he's got some experience throwing the football. I think he had like 7 touchdowns to 1 interception, something crazy like that. Like his dad, he's got really good patience and vision as a runner. No nonsense, not a lot of wasted movements. You see that translate to his route running as well, where, not the biggest guy, not the most explosive athlete, but he's efficient. And I think that's really important. These are guys I think that could play all 3 downs for you. Maybe not to the same degree as others where, like a guy like Dylan Laube may not be someone you want playing early downs a lot, but he has the ability to. And I think that's going to be really important for this Patriots backfield where they want to be able to be multiple. Finally, the day 3 edge defenders. Like I mentioned, I'd like to see the Patriots add a bit of youth, especially like a young pass rush specialist where they're not necessarily tied to a Josh Uche long-term. And Nelson Caesar, Cedric Johnson, and Muhammad Kamara. Some guys that had some pretty impressive showings at the Combine and at the Senior Bowl. Like different guys succeeded different places, but they're versatile. These are guys you could put all up and down the defensive line who can start as pass rush specialists and also have the ability to contribute on any down once they kind of get more refined and get better coaching, with the Patriots having Drew Wilkins, who has a good track record, Coach Matt Judon to his first Pro Bowl, actually. And then you also have Joe Kim, who's so good at teaching hand fighting and technique and things like that. I think getting one of those edge defenders on day 3 to serve a rotational role and potentially grow into something more down the line could really be beneficial for New England. All right, that went on for a while, but that was a lot of fun. All right, let me just check the comments, see if you guys had anything that I maybe missed. I want to make sure I'm not missing out on you guys. Let's see. And if anybody has a last-minute question, feel free to throw it in the chat. That's what we're here for. New OT signing. Oh, let's see. Okay, I guess they signed someone. Sorry, I was on screen share. Let me see. All right. The beauty of a live show. Who did they sign? Oh, they signed Chuk Okorafor. Okay, that's interesting. I haven't done a ton of work on Chuk. I'm not going to lie to you. I think he's been solid for the Steelers, though. I can't really say whether he moves the needle a ton for me quite yet. Let's see. Calvin posted a little clip here. I do know he's a bigger guy. Again, I need to watch the tape on him. Probably going to be more of like a swing tackle option, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think he's really someone that you're going to expect to be a starter, especially if you're looking at like this new era of football. I think someone like a Jonah Williams, maybe not a Donovan Smith necessarily. I don't think he's the best option if you want to plug him in at the offensive tackle spot, but definitely interesting. So I'm going to hop off here, actually do some film study and get a little bit more info on you. But thank you all for watching. Obviously, appreciate you so much. This is a lot of fun. I love doing these mailbags with you all. But until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other,